Okay, good morning and welcome to today's webinar. We appreciate you joining us. My name is Isabella Perry and I'm going to be your moderator. For this presentation, we will be discussing navigating Global GAP IFA V6, new USA NIGL and tools for a smooth transition. Presented by Chris Reno, Commercial Business Manager of Perry Johnson Registrars, Food Safety Inc., and Antonio
Restrepo.
Thank you. Producer, Relationship Manager of GLOBAL.Ga.P North America. Quick housekeeping. All attendees are muted for the duration of this presentation. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please use the chat portion of the Teams control panel to ask any questions. The slides and the recording will be available on our website after this presentation. Any additional questions, please contact us through our website for more info. Now they'll take it away discussing today's topic.
Thank you. So my name is Antonio Restrepo. I've been working for GLOBAL.Ga.P as a producer relationship manager, about 3 years. And before that, I worked for a large farming company with farms all around the United States and Latin America as a food safety manager. So I have a lot of what I like to say, boots on the ground experience in doing food safety programs, implementing food safety programs, and particularly with GLOBAL.Ga.P and IFA. So with that said, here's agenda. We're just gonna talk about the introduction, objectives. We're gonna have a very brief overview of the GLOBAL.Ga.P products, and then we're gonna talk about the tools that we have for IFA. And then the top of the cake, what we're here for is for the National Interpretation Guidelines for the United States. So, and what we want to do with this, we want to understand the basics of the United States National Interpretation Guidelines. And I want you to understand at the end of this presentation how to use them. This is not a training. We're not going to go technically into every principle, but the idea is that you know they are there and how to use them. Okay, so what is GLOBAL.Ga.P? GLOBAL.Ga.P is a brand of farm assurance solutions. Normally people think GLOBAL.Ga.P is a company, but the company actually was called Food Plus, and recently we changed the name to Agraya. So if sometimes you start getting emails or hearing Agraya, this is the company that owns the brand GLOBAL.Ga.P. And what we do is we set voluntary standards for the certification of agricultural products around the world. We have 3 lines of products under this brand. For United States, the main ones that we have is the HPSS, which is basically only food safety. We have the PHA, which is for packing houses. We have the IFA, Integrated Farm Assurance, and this is the one that we're going to talk about today. This is our flagship, and this is the one that includes food safety, sustainability, and workers' well-being. And on top of that, we have some add-ons that you can put into IFA, such as GRAS, which is social responsible practices, and the product safety rule. Okay, so we're going to talk about some tools and resources that we have. Here's for you to understand kind of how they work together. So what we have first is the principles and criteria. This is what we normally call the audit. So when you go the checklist, when you go to the checklist, you're going to have a column that says the principle and a column that says the criteria. The principle is a general intention of what is needed. What are the results or the end that is looking into that question, and the criteria is the ways to make that principle. On top of that, that's in the same document. Then on top of that, we have another document called the guidelines, and in which it expands a little bit more about how to meet those criteria. The guidelines is just that, is a guideline. You don't have to do it like that, but it gives you a lot of ideas or examples, clarifications. And then we have the National Interpretation Guidelines. This is what we are here for. So we're going to focus on the National Interpretation Guidelines. Other tools that we have, for instance, we have something called the Transition Tool, which is an Excel that we're going to talk about. And this is for transitioning from version 5 to version 6. I guess many of you are already in version 6, but if you're not, you need to use this tool. And we have some educational videos also about some global gap topics. So for the videos, these are very short. They focus on the producer. This is not like a scientific or technical video. They're very simple to understand, go to the point, and they of course are free, and you can just find them on YouTube. When you go to YouTube, you search for Global Gap Educational Video Series, and then you're gonna look for the playlist and look for Global Gap Educational Video Series. Some of the, well, actually, no, all the videos we have 9. A lot of them are about risk assessment, the first 6 ones. A global gap is very based on risk. We're not very prescriptive. We don't tell you exactly what to do. It's more like you do your risk assessment and then you make your program based on your risk. So for global gap, it's very important that you understand risk assessment, and that's why we have 6 videos of these. But we also have mass balance, continuous improvement, and self-assessments. So take this in mind when we go through the National Interpretation Guideline, that we also have these videos. The transition tool is basically a person will tell you how to find it. You go to Global Gap webpage here, and you go to Document Center, and you search for transition tool. Now, we have several transition tools, so be aware that we have an edition that is called SMART. We do not use SMART in the United States. This is for other markets. All United States buyers require GFS. So be sure that you get fruits and vegetables, because we have also one for aquaculture and flowers. So be sure that you select fruit and vegetable GFS. And this is the one that you use for the United States market. So what it is a spreadsheet. And what we have done is we have put all the version 5 and the version 6 together. And there were major changes on version 6. It was not an update. It was basically a total redo of the audit. So all the questions are different, all the sections are different, and so they're not going to match directly. So what we have done is, when you open the file, you're going to see the questions in this green background organized by version 6. So here we can see the first one. It says GFS 0101, and it's about document control. And below that question with the white background, you're going to see the equivalent question or principle for the old version. And you notice here that in the old version, it was actually section 0202, right? Also, all that we're doing is mapping. So if you have a program and you have a record that is for a document on SOP that is for record keeping, then you're going to know, okay, so this one used to go with AF 0202. Now it's going to go to GFS 0101. On top of that, as you can see, the principles have changed. So you need to review, be sure that you meet all the requirements. The cool thing about this is this one has a answer column in which you can select yes or no or NA and actually do the audit. And you're going to have a calculation sheet for both version 5 and version 6. So basically, you are doing 2 audits into one, okay? And you're going to have the results, and you're going to see your percent. You're going to see what else you need to do to pass the audit or meet the requirements. So this transition tool is supporting to transition from version 5 to version 6. This is not mandatory. You don't have to do it. In my experience, is a very good tool to help you do it, okay? And also, these are not training tools. Again, this is just voluntary and very helpful for this transition. Okay, so on top of, we saw the videos, we saw the transition tool, and now we have also a document called the guideline. So same thing, you go to the document center, and we have guidelines for fruit and vegetable, aquaculture, and flowers. Of course, we're gonna focus here on fruit and vegetables, and you're gonna see topics, some of the topics here for instance, how to do continuous improvement plan, things about subcontractors, equipment, food defense, food fraud, mitigation. So this gives you a lot more information, clarification about what that means and how can you do it. Sometimes even have examples. So if you see here, examples, risk summary. So I put here an example on how this works, and this is for bathrooms or toilets. So these are 3 different documents. One is the principles and criteria, which is basically the audit or the checklist. So when you go to the checklist, you're going to have the principle. Clean toilets are provided for workers, visitors, and subcontractors in the vicinity of their work. This is a very simple. The principles are very simple, straightforward. It's a general statement. And when you read it, you're just like, okay, so how do I meet this requirement? Okay, so the second part, you go to the criteria. The criteria gives you a lot more details on how to meet that principle, right? So you see it has design, as constructor, allow accessibility for servants, blah, blah, blah. Then you can go to the guidelines, okay? Now, the principles and criteria, you have to do that. That's the requirement. Guidelines are just help guidelines. This is not a rule. You don't have to do it that way, okay? But there's a lot more explanation here. I'm not going to read it, but you can see it tells you a lot more about what they're looking or what you can do with the portable toilets, and again, a lot more information. Then on top of that, you go to the National Interpretation Guidelines. Okay, so what we're going to talk about what are the NIGs, but basically get this wide global criteria and try to narrow down to, okay, what that means in United States or what that means in our state. So we can see here, we actually have references to OSHA codes, right? That says that what that means for enough bathroom in the United States for OSHA means 20 for every 20 workers, at least 1 restroom, right? So we now have some guidelines. Now, in the National Interpretation Guidelines, we're gonna find either a reference to the law, and if it's the law, you have to do it. Basically, it becomes part of the requirements. But also we're going to find recommendations such as systems to use or external links, or we're going to talk about that, but that is not a requirement. It's going to say that you could participate or you could do this. But anything that is the law, you have to do. Okay, so interpretation guidelines. First, let's talk about the National Technical Work Group. This is a volunteer group of experts in the United States. On each country has their own National Technical Work Group, and it's open to anybody. We have producers, buyers, CB, consultants, academia, and what we do is we meet and we get these global GAP standards to practice and identify implementation challenges. All this expertise is necessary to ensure that standards are applied to local conditions and improve the audit process. So a lot of stuff that are in the requirements and the principles are hard to implement in the United States or in another country. You know, what works in one country is not doesn't work in another country. So that's part of what the National Technical Work Group does. We review standards, and we have 2 meetings a year. Again, this is open, so if you want to participate, you just go to GLOBAL.Ga.P and look for National Technical Work Groups, and there's going to be a registration there, and you can participate in these groups. I'll tell you that we listen. In fact, before I work with GLOBAL.Ga.P, I can say they listen, because a lot of the things that I bring up to the group, they basically did something about it. So the National Technical Work Group, these people in the United States, they do the National Interpretation Guidelines. What that means is basically, I told you already, okay, they talk about bathrooms, what that means in the United States. They talk about overtime, what that means in the United States. They talk about biodiversity, how can do that in the United States. So That is basically what it is. We see here that, for instance, align with locally available resources such as USDA Natural Resource Conservation Services, and also the Stewardship Index for specialty crops. So those are recommendations that we're going to see later. So where you find the National Interpretation Guidelines, same thing, you go back to the Document Center and you type NIG USA, and then you're going to find the National Interpretation Guidelines for fruit and vegetables. Be sure, again, that it says USA because we have an NIG in every country that we have standards, almost every country. So this is an example of the National Interpretation Guidelines. So it also has the principle and the criteria. So this part is basically they copy the part of the audit or the checklist. And then you're going to have a column that says National Interpretation Guideline, basically, okay, what that means in the United States, or how can you do this in the United States, or what is required for you to do to meet these requirements in the United States. Okay, so in the case of biodiversity, you can see that they are telling you as an example, so this is not necessary, the producer may show evidence for participation in a voluntary program such as the Natural Conservation Service. Also talks about fish and wildlife programs, and also refer to tools such as the SISC. I'm going to call it SAIC, but it's the Stewardship Index for a specialty crop. So in this case, for instance, none of what is in here is required or mandatory. The auditor is not going to say, oh, you're not participating in this program or you're not using this tool. No, okay. Only when it's the law, if it tells you this is a requirement of the law, that's the only place you have to do it, okay? During the presentation, or when we're going to go through a lot of the principles and talk about what are the NIGs on those principles. But here I made a summary in front of some of the resources that they talk about, like the Natural Resource Conservation Services, the Stewardship Index for specialty crops, the Cool Farm Tool, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, and kind of what principles they tell you can use those tools. If you see basically the Stewardship Index for specialty crops is the one that we see the most in here. I think they're going to share this presentation, so you can come back later to this screen if you want to see it, or you can take a picture. So let's start with the Stewardship Index for specialty crops. This is an initiative dedicated to develop tools for measuring the performance of regenerative and sustainable practices across all specialty crops. So basically, they came out with, okay, what are the measurements? What are the metrics? And then they created this calculator, which is very cool, and it's available to all the producers with no cost. And if you are a supplier, let's say for Walmart, I don't know, in my time, Walmart used to ask for the sustainability consumption, and you had to enter this information into a program called Thesis. So they have a button where they call it easy button, where you can when you enter all your data and you have it in the system, you just click a button and it goes to Thesis for companies like Walmart. So some of the things that you can measure.
Antonio, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to jump in for a second. So I know you mentioned Walmart, and obviously they're a massive retailer, so we're all familiar with who they are. Now, I know in the past they have used the SMETA has been somewhat of a guideline that they used for a lot of the social accountability and responsibility. So am I understanding correctly that with these new tools from GLOBAL.Ga.P, that customers would be able to use GLOBAL.Ga.P brand tools for some of the social accountability, responsibility metrics that are set forth by the by the big box stores? Is that accurate?
Okay, so let's start with something. So these tool, the SISC calculator, this is not a GLOBAL.Ga.P tool. This is for the stewardship. All that we do is in our national interpretation guidelines. For instance, the principle requires you to have metrics on energy, on nitrogen, and on water. So the producer reads that and says, okay, how can I do that? And I don't even know how to do, how do I collect the data? What data do I collect? How do I calculate the emissions? So all that we do in GLOBAL.Ga.P is in the National Interpretation Guidelines is telling you, okay, so for you to meet this requirement, you can use this tool. This tool is available, okay? And then when they come to the tool, this is a third party, has nothing to do with us. We of course talk with them and they agree, to list them as a resource. So what they can do is they start collecting that information and then they have all these calculations, okay? Now, they have a button where they can click it and go to thesis. Thesis is only for sustainability, not for SMETA, okay? SMETA it's something else, it's social responsibility. We can talk later about something else that we're trying to do with Walmart for social responsibility, but again, that's not the topic on this presentation. But if you go to the SES calculator, these are the metrics that you can enter information for your free program. They're going to ask you, how to enter the nitrogen or gas or receipts or invoices. I'm not sure how that works, but you put out the information, they do the calculations. This is free for the producers because they have buyers that they're going to want that information, they're going to pay for it. Another resource that we list is the Natural Resource Conservation Services. And basically what it's going to say is that you can participate in one of their programs, and then you can go here to their page and you can find, I'm not going to open it right now, but you can find a lot of programs. It's about 24, I think it's 12 programs and 12 initiatives. Here are a lot of them, and just to show you that there's a lot of them, but you can choose whatever can fit your needs and whatever is available. There are also local resources. You're gonna see something like, I don't know, Michigan program for this, specific to the states, okay? Some of these programs even pay you to do, like if you get some area for, like reservation land, they pay you, as some they don't pay you, but again, you can contact them and see if there's something you can participate. And so when you go to the audit and the auditor goes, you can say, I'm participating in this program. Again, it's not mandatory, you don't have to do it, but it's something that will help a lot. The other thing is the US Fish and Wildlife Services. So one of the ways you can show, for instance, for biodiversity, that you meet the requirements is that you have evidence of an assessment by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. And this is a thing about endangered species. Basically, when you do, you need to know in your area what kind of species you have, which one are endangered, that kind of stuff. And sometimes they can actually go and do an assessment, but that's not really necessary. You can go to this page, which is the IPAC, Information on Planning Consultations, and this is very cool. I'm actually probably gonna open this one. Just a quick, show you very quick here. And you can select an area, let's say 27603, which is where I live in Raleigh. And then you can say, okay, I'm gonna do a polygon. Let me see. I wanna see what species are in here. Finish drawing and continue. And you're gonna have a list of endangered species. See, so basically you just need to have these for that requirement biodiversity. Say, I know what species are here, and probably you're gonna have more information on what to do, what not to do, what to spray, what not to spray, or how to encourage their habitats. So that's a very cool resource. Okay, so that's about the resources. Now I'm gonna go through some of the actual principles and try to explain what is in the or what the National Interpretation Guideline said about that principle. So let's start with continuous improvement. There's a video on continuous improvement. This picture is from that video, so you can go to YouTube and get more information. Now, let's be clear. The videos are for GLOBAL.Ga.P, globally, the whole world. So anything that is in the National Interpretation Guidelines, because it's for United States, it's not going to be in this video. So it's not going to say you have to have 20 bathrooms per employee because that's in the United States. So on continuous improvement, what we said in the National Interpretation Guidelines is, okay, the producer can choose what the continuous improvement practices are, but they have to be relevant to IFA. Okay, you cannot say, I'm gonna bench at 300 pounds. That has nothing to do with IFA, right? And the evidence will be documented in the principles and criteria, basically in the audit, as long as the improvement or the intention of improvement is evident. So what that means is you can work on any principle of the audit, but corrective actions doesn't count as an improvement. So basically, if you have an audit and says you were not meeting the requirement and then you fix it, that's not an improvement, that's a correction. An improvement is something that you already have a baseline that you measure before, that you have a plan to work into it, and you put that work, the plan to work to reach that target. So because this means measuring, you need to have data. So we go back to tools like the SISC calculator or Cool Farm. I didn't make a screen about Cool Farm, but Cool Farm is basically similar to the SISC calculator, but Cool Farm is based in England. I think it's a European tool. It's set up to work in any country, but you can also search for Cool Farm online, and you can choose if you want to use that or SCS calculator. So, for instance, the National Interpretation Guideline gives you some examples, and these are not exhaustive. Basically, doesn't mean this is the only thing you can do. You can do anything else, but it just kind of give you an idea. Oh, okay, this is something I can work in. Like you can increase producer training. It's like, okay, we're gonna do more training, or I don't know, do tests and be sure that they all know what they're talking about. We can make a reduction in accidents for the employees. We can work on doing less waste and increase packing. We can do reduction in pests. For instance, if you are counting, I don't know, 3 miles per month, try to get it down to 1 or 0. I don't know. Same thing in the field. If they're doing scouting and they're finding pests, try to decrease it. Also, you can do energy efficient, like change. Okay, we're gonna change. We have, let's say, diesel water pumps for the wells, and we're gonna change it for electrical. Of course, you don't have to do this in 1 year, because if you have, I don't know, 20 pumps that cost a lot of money, you can work on a plan for 3 years and say, I'm gonna change 2 every year. So anything that you can measure and improve. Another thing you can do is reduction in complaints. This can be internal or external. So those are just examples. Subcontractors. First, we need to be sure what is the difference between a subcontractor and a service provider. So the subcontractors, the entity furnishing labor, equipment, and/or materials to perform specific farm operations on their contract with the producer, such as custom harvest, spraying, picking the fruit. And a service provider is a commercial entity that provides work performed in an expert manner by an individual or team for the benefit of the producer, such as a crop consultant, IPM advisor. So the difference is generally that a service provider is included in a specific principle and criteria for a task. It's a specific task. Where the subcontractor is an outsourced farming operation and applies to more or the one several PCs or questions. Another way to say is the subcontractor is somebody that is doing work that is supposed to be done by the farmer. That is farming activity like harvesting. Okay, the harvesting is supposed to do by the producer, but he just decided to do that. Applications in the field, spraying applications in the field is supposed to do by the farmer. If you contract somebody else to do it, that is a subcontractor. Okay. But a service provider is something that is not necessarily part of the farming operation. Let's say get portable toilets. So the toilet business is not a farm business, so that's a service provider. And also pay attention to this packing house pest control, because this is management of animals, pest control, not products or pests for the crops. So that's also normally not a job of the farmer. So this is also a service provider. So spray application in the fields as a contractor, but a packing house pest control company is a service provider. So that's a clarification in the National Interpretation Guidelines. Now we're going to talk about parallel ownership. Before we have parallel production and parallel ownership, and now we only have parallel ownership. And basically, in general, what this means is product that when you're handling product that is certified, and you have also product that is non-certified by GLOBAL.Ga.P. It might be certified under any other standard, but if it's not GLOBAL.Ga.P, even if you buy it or you're managing whatever, so own or produce, that is called parallel ownership. Okay. So PO can be parallel ownership can be non-applicable when if the parallel ownership of all product is certified under GLOBAL.Ga.P, even if it's somebody else, but it's GLOBAL.Ga.P, or if the packing house, in terms of the packing house unit, is a subcontractor for several growers. So you're shipping product to a packing house, but the packing house is just a third party for different companies, so that packing house doesn't have to have parallel ownership. Let me just go back here. Now, identification of a GLOBAL.Ga.P. Parallel ownership requires you to identify what products are GLOBAL.Ga.P. and which ones are not, or basically not which ones are not, but just to identify which ones are GLOBAL.Ga.P. In the United States, for some producers, that might be complicated because they're going to have to, start segregating in documentations which are GLOBAL.Ga.P. and which are not. But on the National Interpretation Guidelines, we had this in version 5 and they took it away in version 6. So what we did is we added into the National Interpretation Guidelines as a way out having to do this. So if you have a written agreement available between the producer or the producer group and the buyer not to use the GGN on producer final product or packaging, then this is an NA. This is a very important one, especially for CBs, because sometimes they come and try to get the producer to meet this requirement, but if they have that letter, that is fine. And also sometimes the buyers, the packing house, not necessarily all these final buyers or retailers. So if the farm is an entity and the packing house or they have a sale company, so this sale company or this packing house can be the buyer, as long as they're the one paying the crop, who can make this letter. For mass balance, So the thing with the mass balance is basically is a way to measure the inputs and the outputs and account for any losses. And the mass balance is kind of hard to understand sometimes, but the whole concept is to be sure that if you have a production that is, I don't know, 10 tons, you're not selling 200 tons, right? So it kind of makes sense that you are shipping and labeling and selling as GLOBAL.Ga.P the product that you're producing, right? So what we do is a mass balance is basically this is not a documentation. It's not doesn't have to be a record, but it's a way that you can explain. Okay, this is what I produce. This is what I sold. This is what I went to trash, and this is what I have in inventory. So everything matches. So the clarifications here is that you can use a producer pack out or any documentation that traces volumes or weights of the products received. This has to be in volumes and weight because if not, it doesn't match. You cannot say, I got 20 beans from the field and I sold 2,000 cases of 10 pounds because you know those beans and 10-pound boxes doesn't match. So you need to say, I harvested this many, you convert those beans to tons or kilos or whatever. So I harvested this many tons and you convert these 10-pound boxes to tons and I sold this many tons. And this is what I have in inventory. So you can show any documentation. You don't have to provide any, but you can show any, and these include things like inventory and sales, things from software. You can produce software records. The other important thing here is that the auditor is gonna see these documents and they're gonna confirm that you have a mass balance and it matches, but they're not gonna report anything. Sometimes the producers are like, oh, why do I need to show my sales? You know, another thing I see is they show sales and volumes and they just cross the pricing. You don't need to show pricing because it's just volumes, okay? And also you can do the mass balance, the frequency that you want. You can do this daily when you finish the day. You can do this weekly or seasonal. In my case, when I used to do this, I do it by season, the whole production crop, you know, when we start first packing until the last packing. And the reason why, because financially you had to close that and see how much money you did. And then normally you have a summary of how many you pack, how many you dump. And this is basically the mass balance, but you can do it the frequency that you want. Complaints, the complaints are related to food safety. I'm sorry, GLOBAL.Ga.P related topics like food safety, environmental, workers' health and safety. It's not related to quality, but you can have an SOP that covers quality, food safety, and workers' welfare. If you do that, of course, the workflow is different. So basically, it says when you have a complaint from a customer about quality, then goes through this or you do that. But when it's food safety, you go here and you do that, right? It has to cover all the aspects of the standard and internal of external. So this means employee complaints or customer complaints. And also workers' complaints and no retaliations are covered under OSHA and H2A. So you need to go to your OSHA and local regulations to be compliant with whatever the state is asking you. Some of the things that normally is required in the States is to have these right to know posters. So if it's required by the state, you have to do that. Also, they talk about the non-conforming product, which in other words is just the hold and release program. And they talk about a final product. So we have a lot of confusion here. So non-conforming product, what we specify in the interpretation guidelines is that is final product that is already packed. That's the first thing. And it's a product that after packed, it's being final, do not meet the requirements either for food safety, legal, or a specific quality. So basically you pack it, but you cannot ship it. So that's why it's kind of hold and release. So if, for instance, this pepper in the field, if it's damaged and it's not non-conforming, it's not conforming for heat. It's basically food loss is waste because it has not been packed. So we're not talking about that. We're talking everything has been packed. And then you have to have a procedure to what to do with this product. We don't use this term in Global Gap, but in United States, that basically means is hold and release. I think we use that term hold and release and the principles. In terms of laboratory testing, is basically what it says is that you can, on top of the ISO 17025 that is required, you can also do or use water testing or labs that use a standard approved by local competence authorities. In this case, like the ELAB, which is Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. They have many on different states, like the California. And also sometimes we have universities that have their own protocol, so that would work as well. And equipment, they talk about calibration, and they talk about something called traceability, which is a little bit confusing. So traceability is basically that the equipment that you have has been calibrated under a recognizable standard, national or international standard. So in this example, you see this thermometer said traceable. That means that it was calibrated with a more complex equipment, more precise equipment to be sure that when it reads 23.9, it is 23.9 mass or more or less, I don't know how many degrees, right? When you get the stainless steel way to calibrate your scales, you see that they have a traceable certificate, okay? You don't necessarily have to have a traceable certificate that says traceable. Like this big of their measuring cup, for instance, is done by a reputable brand, and you know this, you can trust this is where it says 700 is 700, but you cannot go to the farm and says, okay, this is a gallon of milk, and so here's half, and just something like that. That is, of course, non-traceable. And another way to interpret the traceable when it not comes to equipment, but also to processes, so the way that you calibrate. And we said that calibration might refer to a widely used industry accepted method, such as pesticide equipment calibration. So you can use manufacturer provided calibration procedures, or you can do extension services best practices. So in this case, you can go to, for instance, let me see if I can open this link, and universities, and here's a calculation from Cornell University. So we consider this as a recognizable method. Okay. So we go back to the global gap status. I think I mentioned it before. Yes, I did, but you have to say all the product that is global gap in the transaction documents, but this can be an A when there's a statement issued by the client seller to the producer not to use global gap number or to identify global gap status, and is signed by the marketing or the packing company. So basically, the seller send you a letter, or the buyer saying, I don't need you to identify the products as global gap, the documentation as global gap. Remember that you cannot put global gap seals or logos in the package. You could put the GGN number, but what I'm talking about here is the transaction documents. Bathrooms, we talk about the bathrooms. Basically, in the United States is 20 workers. For every 20 workers, there have to be at least one bathroom. In terms of gender, you need to see the local regulations. There are one that says for 20 workers of each gender. So if you have 20 male and 1 female, then you need to have 2. If you have 19 men and 1 female, you need to have 2. First aid, the standard says that you need to have a minimum to control minor wounds. Materials are available to clean, disinfect, and protect and cover. So in the United States, there's a regulation for that, which is CFR 1910-151, and basically tell you what is the minimum material that need to be on that. So you can either go online and look for an ANSI first aid kit that meets the ANSI 308.1 1998. This one actually is like 2015. I don't know why we had different years. Or you can go online, look at the list of what's required, and you can just buy it. Okay. So for instance, you don't need to have any medicine in here. Most of the local laws also don't allow you to give any medicine, but just go to this list and be sure that you have that. Biodiversity and habitats. Okay. So management and protection, again, we talk about just go to the National Resource Conservation Services or Farm Service Agency. You can get these assessments from Fish and Wildlife Resources. They want to show you when you can look on the map and get a list of the flora and fauna. For land conservation, there are something on the EPA called the Bulletins Live 2. So you can go to this page also. And you're going to see here Live 2. And this is very similar to the other map. You can basically go to the area and mark, and you're going to have a list of the pesticides that might have restrictions on that area. And for metrics, go back, you can go to SISC, or you can have the maps or like conservation metrics. So we talk here about the bulletins. What are the bulletins? It's basically additional restrictions on pesticides. If the pesticide label have this says environmental hazards, endangered species protection, obtain a bulletin, you need to come online to this page I told you here, Bulletin Live 2, and you're going to open the map, and you're going to say which area you are, and you're going to have a list of additional considerations that you have to do, like do not apply from this time to this time, or latest application this date, or anything related to that restrictions in that area. Energy efficiency. For monitoring, you need to review energy bills. It's not simply to download them. So it's okay. You need to monitor. And monitor doesn't mean I have the receipts. It's just, okay, I know, this month was this much energy. We had this production. Last month we had this much energy. And you basically have to review them. You need to have an improvement plan for energy. And some of the goals might be, for instance, reducing non-renewable to renewables, such as I told you before, the electric pumps, water pumps. And for the metrics, the minimum that need to have is total energy use on the farm for each energy source by month. So gas, lighting, diesel. The proportion of renewable or non-renewable energy, then a stewardship index. You can do for this the stewardship index, SISC. They have a metric for that. And also consider right now, many of these new requirements in the standard are recommended, but the industry is moving towards this anyways, and all these recommended principles are gonna eventually change to minors, so it's good to go ahead and start working on this. So the greenhouse emission, this is also kind of complicated to do calculations if you do not have a a system. So what you can do is same way, go to SISC or go to the Cool Farm tool, enter your information, and you're going to have this. The minimum requirement is the total amount of energy used on the farm in CO2 equivalents per hectare per month, and the equivalent CO2 emissions per kilogram per month. So kilogram of production, right? So I got this many kilos of potatoes and this many hectares of potatoes. Waste management, there's something specific about holding areas for diesel or other fuel oil tanks. So here we have a reference to a EPA law. Let me see if I put here something. So you need, if you have areas with more than 55 gallons, but less than 1,320 gallons, then you need to have these steps to prevent chemicals from being discharged. And then you need to have the ability to contain spills at or near the source. So how can you do that? For instance, you can include ditches, curbs, berms, drain covers, and absorbent material if allowed. They can be semi-permanent or permanent, but buckets of 10 are not accepted. I'm talking about more than 55 gallons. Let me see. Now, again, there's a law. I don't know why I didn't put it here, but you can look for EPA requirements for spill prevention, control, and countermeasurements, or SPCC. And I don't think this is the case, but if you have more than 1,320 gallons and there are other requirements, I'm sorry, if you have more than like 42,000 gallons or something, then you need to have a plan. This is not GLOBAL.A.P, this is the law. So I don't think this probably applies to a lot of the producer, but just consider that if you have a large amount of diesels in your farm, diesel or other fuel tanks. Waste management. So what we do in the National Interpretation Guidelines is kind of clarify what is the difference between surplus produce and food waste. Surplus is anything that was not consumed or sold for consumption. So anything that have been unharvested or left in the field, and the surplus needs to be redirected. We're gonna see in the other page redirected to what. And then food waste or loss is a product that is not marketable but edible. Food that is not channeled for human consumption, animal feed, or bio-based materials. So basically, yes, it's product that you were not able to sell. Like let's say when you do this hold and release because you thought your product was contaminated and you had to dump it. So again, SISC, we see this mostly in anything that's related to metrics. You can use that calculator. This is just an example of a surplus product. If you don't sell it, then you can send it to, if it was not harvested, you can send it for human consumption, like you get pickers to, people to pick it up or send it number 2 or send it to a processing plant. You can use it as animal feed or bio-based materials, and GLOBAL.A.P prefers you to do this and not food waste. So before putting the product in the trash, just try to do anything else. Of course, unless it's contaminated. Fertilizers and biostimulants. So same thing, you need to have metrics of potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, and you can use the SISC calculator. Prevention of pollution of water sources. Something that we specify here is you need to consider the distance of the fertilizers from the water sources, whether the water sources are open or closed, if the storage is long-term, permanent, or only used immediately during applications. And then we talk about ventilations. The principles are that you need to have ventilation. The NIGs, we said if the main entrance to the facility, basically the facility is the fertilizer storage facility, allows sufficient air into the facility during use. That is good. And if there's not observable odors are present upon walking into the storage. So sometimes the storage is like a garage with a huge garage door. So when the garage door is closed, you don't really have like a ventilation, but the door is big enough to let all these fumes and gases escape. So that basically what we're saying in the National Interpretation Guideline is that's fine. You don't need to have like a structure fan or something. On water permits, where the district or water management allotments are given by the entity of a water or district and a license or permit is not required, this is not applicable. So there's a lot of districts that say, okay, you have to use this many water, but they don't need to have a permit to use the water. Where the water is controlled by the water district, additional evidence can be in the form of payments, etc. Like when you have allotments or payments. Producers must show they observe the rate and the annual total allotment. So in some states like Colorado, I know they have, you can use this many gallons of water per year. So they need to have a way to measure it and show, okay, I know what I used. Water totals kept confidential with the auditor, CB, and Agraya, which is the owner of GLOBAL.Ga.P. So this information, basically any information that is related with numbers, none of that is basically put on the audit. On that, the audit's going to say that they made the requirement. Water efficiency. So the requirements is that you need, whenever you can collect and retain water, but in some states, when you go to the local requirements or laws, it's not allowed or legal to collect water. Again, some states or some specific situations when there's drought conditions or there are emergency water declarations. So of course, if it's not legal, you cannot do it. Another thing that you can do is optimization, like crop water needs are based on data. So either you have sensors or you have weather information. And then again, the SISC can be a good product or system to do your metrics on water.
Yeah, perfect. So Antonio, I wanted to jump in just really quickly. You mentioned on that last slide with water measurements that these numbers will be kept confidential between the certification body, the auditor, and the site. I know that we have some customers, I know that there are a lot of customers out there that like to share their audit report with their clients as well, not just the certificate. So am I understanding that those numbers will also be kept off of the audit report, or will that be on the report, but nowhere published outside of internal communications?
Yes, so definitely not. We don't do anything for external communications. What I'm saying is that the auditors are not supposed to collect data, like let's say when it says invoices, and they can say, I check invoices number whatever on this date, but they're not gonna say they paid this much money for the water or the invoice was $10,000. We're not gonna collect that type of information. So when it comes to all these metrics, the auditor can say, okay, they have a metric and they are working on the metric and they're being efficient. But they're not gonna say they have this emission of this many tons of gases, and now they have this many emission of ton of gases. So it's not a report on data. No. We have something called IDA, which is initially made for flowers, and then we are moving it into fruit and vegetables, in which we actually collect data. So it's basically like an ISC calculator, and that is GLOBAL.Ga.P product that could be used for that. That is data reporting, but the GLOBAL.Ga.P audit is not something to report on data. All that is going to say to the producer is they have a water management plan, they have metrics, and they're doing it. That's it.
Certainly. So, this is a lot of good information today. Obviously I love the transition tool. I think that's going to be something that, while it's not mandatory, I think that everyone should be using that tool, to get prepared for the transition. So I know we've covered a lot of information today, and we've run out of time. I know you've still got some slides left, so I just want to make sure and let our audience know that the full presentation will be posted on our social media, YouTube page, things like that, later today, maybe tomorrow at the latest. And then I'll also follow up with everybody that was here today to see if we can answer any questions one-on-one. If you have a question that wasn't covered in today's topic, please feel free to reach out directly. If it's a sales, certification body related question, you can reach out directly to myself. If it's a question that is more specific, a technical question, something about GLOBAL.Ga.P or the standard, you can please feel free to reach out directly to Antonio. And Antonio, do you have your contact information here on this last page as well?
No, I actually didn't include it, but my email is Restrepo, R-E-S-T as in Thomas, R-P as in Peter O, at globalgap.org.
Perfect. Well, with that, I again, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you on the next, live webinar. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.